How could a channel like this be complete without a video on the circle of fifths? And the answer is it probably can't be, so here we go. The circle of fifths is like legendarily confusing for guitarists, and there are two reasons for that. One is the construction of the guitar itself. So if you think about a piano, it's got all the notes laid out linearly. Well, the guitar does too, but it's got it done in 6 different times, where the piano is only once. Here's a great example. Here are 2 notes. Here's a C note on the D string, 10th fret, and a G note on the 12th fret of the G string. On a piano, there's one place to play that. On the guitar, I can play it here, 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 and I can play it way up here. So it's just harder to see intervals on the guitar because they're laid out across the strings rather than in a linear fashion. They're linear here too, but they're also expressed across the strings. A little bit more difficult, but it's worth it because it's a guitar, so that's awesome. The other thing, the other reason why it's so confusing is that the circle of fifths is a very, very deep subject. It's based on a very simple mathematical principle, but as that plays out, the context and the resulting mathematical constructs and relationships is incredibly deep. So without context, you can get a piece of information from inside this depth somewhere. Somebody could say to you, hey, did you know that if you play the circle of fifths backwards, it's actually in fourths? That's true. But without context, you're like, what? Or they can say, oh, I keep track of the order of the sharps and the flats using the circle of fifths. Okay, you're a Martian. I don't understand what you're talking about, right? Without some sort of proper context, all of that information is lost. The good news is that while it's an extremely deep subject, it has a lot of depth of relationship to be expressed. It's based on an extremely narrow mathematical construct that's very, very easy to understand and extremely easy to map on the fretboard. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris. Today you will learn how to map the circle of fifths directly onto the fretboard. We're going to use this as sort of a fundamental mapping of the basic core mathematical function of the circle of fifths. Before we map it, I'm going to explain what it is. Then we're going to map it directly on the fretboard in 2 different ways, and we'll see some interesting stuff there. And then I'll give you some very, very practical uses about how guitar players, how I as a guitarist, use the circle of fifths in a practical way. And again, this is a 101, right? This is the core functionality of the circle of fifths. So there won't be an enormous amount of depth, but we'll get the core construct on the guitar. And once you have that, then you're going to be able to add stuff to it at will, which is great. Okay, so before we get started mapping it though, let me just explain what it is. In Western music, there are 12 tones. The harmonic series is basically 12 tones that we can identify as musical notes. Those 12 tones are mapped on the guitar from the nut to the 12th fret on every single string. You're just starting and ending on a different note, right? You're expressing the 12 tones from E to E on the E string, from A to A on the A string, D to D on the D string, etc. But there are only 12 notes, right? They're laid out linearly on this instrument as well as on the piano. The circle of fifths just takes those exact same tones and maps them in the order of a fifth. And the interval of a fifth is basically the 5th note away in the tonal series. In other words, if you start on A, you go A, B, C, D, E. E is the 5th away. Now that breaks down when you get to the whole steps and half steps, but don't worry about that too much. So you start on one note, you go up a 5th. From that note, you go up a 5th, etc. Let's map this out onto the fretboard. All right, let's map the circle of fifths to the guitar. First of all, here's the circle of fifths. I can describe the circle of fifths like this. It's the 12 tones of the chromatic scale organized into a sequence using fifths as the interval between each note. Another way to think of it is start at C and move in fifths until you get back to C. Right? We're just going from C up a fifth, from G up a fifth, from D up a fifth, etc. So again, it's just the 12 tones. They're just mapped in a very, very specific order. Okay, now I want to show you how to map these on the neck in sort of the most guitaristic way. We're going to use the E and the A string And we're going to start off by just saying, let's use, on these two strings, let's find the lowest note, the lowest pitch of these notes and just get started. Once we get a little ways down the road, you'll see a pattern emerge, and we can then just sort of hook onto that pattern. As guitarists, we love patterns. So on the E and the A string, the lowest C note, the beginning of the pattern, the lowest C note is here. 3rd fret A string. Next note in the series is G. The lowest one on those two strings, the lowest G, is here. The next note in the series is D. That's the lowest one we can find on the E and the A string. The next note in the series is A. Now, I'm going to stop here and just show you something. That's already a pattern. We can already see a pattern arising. Let's just see if it plays out. We're on A. The next note in the series is E, then B, then F sharp. See what's going on here? C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, F, and then we're back to C. And so you can see the pattern, right? The problem with the pattern, as with all patterns for guitar, is that once you get the pattern down, now what note am I on here? Right? Once you get the pattern down, it can just become muscle memory very, very quickly. So the challenge here is to stay awake, right? Stay found. Don't get lost. Make sure that when you go up the circle, C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp, just make sure you understand where you are on the circle when you map it to the fretboard. Ensure that you say the notes to yourself and you see the relationship. That's going to be very, very important. And as a guitarist, you should probably always be doing that. But, as guitarists, we also fall into the sort of pitfalls and habits of just like, here's a bunch of dots. This exercise, and specifically this series, the Circle of Fifths, you want to just stay awake to it. Okay, now I'm going to just do something interesting and show you an interesting result that suggests the depth of the Circle of Fifths. We're going to just take that same series we just did, and we're going to map bar chords onto that series. So when we're playing notes on the A string, we're going to bring on this A-shaped bar chord. And when we're playing notes on the E string, we're going to bring along this E-shaped bar chord. So listen to this. It's just the first 5 notes of the Circle of Fifths with major bar chords mapped to it. It just happens to be the chord progression from Hey Joe, written by Jimi Hendrix. Right, so you can see already, just doing that the Circle of Fifths is also sort of the keeper of this interesting chord progression information. Jimi Hendrix just played it, used it, wrote a hit song. So I'm just showing you one little peek into the depth. When you map the Circle of Fifths, and then you start to, sort of map all of the major scales in this order, all kinds of insanely cool stuff starts to happen, and that's that depth that we're talking about. Okay, but we're not going to get too far into that. This is a 101 session. I'm just mapping it on the fretboard, showing you how to see it. The next thing we want to do, and this is sort of one of the harder things to do because the guitar is so pattern oriented, is to map it to a single string. And ultimately what you want to do is to map it to every single string. But we're just going to start on the E string, for example. So let's find our C. Here's a C right here. Down to G, then D, then A, then E, then B, then F sharp, then C sharp, then G sharp, then D sharp, then A sharp, then F, and then back to C. Now, you can see hopping around in those 7-fret hops and just like going back and forth, it's a little hard to do. It's a little hard to see intervals that far apart on a single string. It's not necessarily the easy way to map it, but it's definitely something that you want to do holistically through all 6 of these strings, because it's really fundamentally the best way to familiarize yourself with the fretboard. Octaves are a really great way to learn how the fretboard relates to itself and thereby map information to it. But the circle of fifths, specifically on a single string, gets you hunting for and finding notes on strings. And it just builds some connective tissue and some muscle memory in your eyes, ears, and hands that you can't just get any other way. It's like that's the only way to get that capability. It's really, really great. The last thing I want to show you is that I use the circle of fifths in this very, very practical way. And again, this isn't about the depth of it. It's just about what is the circle of fifths? How do you use it? One of the best uses for the circle of fifths, I think, is that whenever you get new information, you learn a new chord or a new scale, take it around the circle of fifths. Start here, play it here, 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 and here, and here, and here, and here. The result will be that new information you've played in every single key and every position on the guitar. Now, you may not ever use all of that information, but it sets up a psychological confidence when you have a new piece of information that you've taken around the circle. You really own it when you do that. And I'll give you an example. Somebody showed me the C blues scale. Cool, I have a new scale. I'm going to take it around the circle of fifths. So I just learned it in C. Here it is in G. Here it is in D. Here it is in A. Here it is in E. Here it is in B. Here it is in F sharp. Here's C sharp blues scale. G sharp blues scale. D sharp blues scale. A sharp blues scale. F. And back to C. Got a new piece of information here. I've just played it everywhere on the neck. I'm feeling pretty good about owning that information. Here's another great example. Woo! Somebody just showed me this chord. It's E minor 9. Cool. I've got a new chord, but do I have it yet? I can play it right here. I'm just going to take it around the circle. Here's E minor 9. I'm going to take it down to C. Here's a C minor 9. Here's a G minor 9. Here's a D minor 9. I'm just using that single string mapping now. A minor 9. E minor 9, that's where I learned it. And I'm taking it to B minor 9. F sharp minor 9. See what I'm doing here? I'm just using that one string and I'm mapping it, but I'm just taking it around the circle. Now I've played, I didn't complete it, but now I've played my new chord in every single key. It just makes me feel good. It just makes me feel like I really own that information. There's a very practical use for the circle of fifths. Again, this is 101. We're looking at that very, very slim mathematical instance. Take the 12 harmonic tones, map them in fifths. What's the result? The result is really deep. The cool thing now is that whenever you come across any piece of information in that stack of information about the circle of fifths, you've got something to map it to. Okay, so there it is, the circle of fifths mapped onto the fretboard. Now again, it's not the depth of the subject itself and all of the sort of mathematical results of what we've just done. There are implications. But it is the core architecture, which again is very, very narrow. 12 notes mapped in fifths. There it is. We've got it on the guitar now. So now if somebody says, they come to you or you find one of those pieces of information from the super depth of the circle of fifths as an idea, and somebody says, oh, did you know that the circle of fifths, if you play it backwards, it's actually in fourths? Now you can go try that, right? Go play the circle of fifths backwards and tell yourself, find out why it's actually in fourths when it goes backwards. Why is that? Go find out, okay? Now you can find that information, and when you see other pieces of information from this huge stack of mathematical results of the circle of fifths, you'll be able to say, oh, that's an interesting piece of information. Now that I can see the circle of fifths, let me check that out, right? It may take years for you to fully understand the circle of fifths. I'm still figuring stuff out. but at least we've got the fundamentals now. I've mapped all this stuff out. I've tabbed it out. That's on Patreon in the link below in the description. Head over there and grab the tabs if you'd like them. Any support over there is greatly appreciated. Fuels this whole thing. I hope you find this interesting. I hope it sets you up to then now be able to digest any context from the circle of fifths that you come across. The circle of fifths is one of those lifelong studies. I hope this has helped get you on the road for that, and I'll see you next time.